Alright, my fellow notebook aficionados, it's time. It's Razer versus ROG, Intel versus AMD, and the all-new Blade 16 versus the already established Zephyrus G16. And while we did our individual reviews for both of them already, I promised you guys a direct head-to-head. Since if you are in the market for a super portable, high-end gaming or creator laptop that crams as much power as possible into absurdly thin chassis that you usually can only find with integrated graphics or with lower-end dedicated GPUs, well, chances are you may look into both of these 5090 fueled beauties. When this chassis of the Zephyrus saw the light of day for the first time in 2024, it was basically without competition. Sure, there have been similarly thin machines like the XPS 16, may it rest in peace, the Lenovo Yoga Pro 9, or maybe even the MSI Stealth, but none of them came with Nvidia's higher-end GPU options, so you basically didn't have much choice. But fast forward to 2025 and the Blade 16 enters the chat with its completely overhauled chassis, pretty much matching the overall dimensions of the Zephyrus. But it seems like Razer did not solely want to match the Zephyrus, and when it comes to performance, well, spoiler alert, it's faster. Actually quite a lot faster in almost all scenarios, but more on that later of course. So does the Zephyrus still stand a chance? Well, I would say a laptop's qualities are not only determined by numbers alone, and while these are pretty similar machines on paper, they might actually cater to a very different audience. And I'm sure there will be enough space for both of them in today's laptop market. So let's get into it, we have a lot to talk about. Alright, let's start with specs. I mentioned it before, but both of these beauties can be yours with Nvidia's latest and greatest, the laptop RTX 5090. And while the G16's variant is limited to 120 watts on paper, Razer beefs it up with up to 160 watts, which is also where most of the performance advantage comes from. The CPU platform is also very different for the two 16 inches, and the Blade 16 bets on the Ryzen 9 HX370 with its 12 cores and 24 threads, whereas the Zephyrus gets the Team Blue treatment with the Core Ultra 9 285H, betting on 6 performance, 8 efficiency and 2 low power E-cores. Both laptops can be yours with 64 gigs of RAM, which is standard for the 5090 config of the G16, while the Blade starts with 32. Add in a 2TB drive for each of our contenders today and a 230Hz G-Sync OLED, and you should have everything you can ask for when it comes to a high-end mobile computing experience. With everything going on regarding prices, I had trouble finding anything about the G16 in our review config, and Razer is also doing some pretty weird stuff with the Blade 16 on its website. So the 4090 config is only available with 64 gigs of RAM and two 2TB SSDs, bumping up the sticker price to eye-watering levels. But given what I was able to find in Germany, both laptops are pretty much on par if you equalize RAM and storage when it comes to price. Of course, you could argue that the Razer is cheaper if you actually get the 32 gig config, but given that we are talking soldered RAM, I am not sure if I would be comfortable opting for that one. I mentioned that before when it comes to their overall dimensions. These two are almost identical for all intents and purposes. Sure, the Razer adds another 1 or 2 mm at the bottom to allow a bit more breathing room for its core components. But in everyday life, it does not really matter, and it's still crazy to me to pick up either one of these bad boys and put the form factor into perspective with the performance potential slumbering beneath the sleek aluminium shells. Of course, which one you prefer visually is subjective. I have always been a bit of a Razer fanboy, so the Blade 16 speaks to me a bit more, but the Zephyrus is of course a lot more unique and also has its own identity. The dark grey finish also has the tremendous advantage of not picking up every single fingerprint just by looking at it, so if you do not want to clean your laptop every 5 minutes, the G16 is the one for you. Chassis quality for both is really good, but I would say Razer has the edge here. Just keep in mind that we are already talking about the high-end level here. But with its stronger hinges and a little more dense feeling base unit, the Blade just feels that tiny bit better. The G16 on the other hand is a bit lighter than its matte black counterpart, so if you really want to keep your setup as portable as possible, this might offset the tiny stability compromises you might have to make. When it comes to ports, both 16 inches come with fast full-size SD card readers, HDMI 2.1, the obligatory audio port, a pair of USB-Cs and 2 USB-As for the G16 and 3 for the Razer. The USB-C situation is also slightly different, since both of them are of the USB 4 standard in the Blade, while the G16 bets on a Thunderbolt 4 on the left and a 3.2 Gen 2 on the right. The latter connects its display signal directly to the 1590, which can have some advantages, while you are a bit more flexible, connecting Thunderbolt or USB 4 docks and accessories to the Blade. I wouldn't say one is better than the other in this regard. Again, the Razer offers simply a bit more, so if you connect a lot of stuff to your laptops, you might want to keep that in mind. Under the hood, you get the same limited upgrade options with a pair of NVMe slots for both of our contenders. And getting inside the Razer is a tiny bit easier, since you do not have to fumble around trying to pop off the button panel. But it's also easy enough on the G16, and given that you will not change your storage config every week, I'd say we can speak of a tie here. Speaking of a tie, when it comes to their respective displays, it's pretty much the same overall experience, even though the G16 adds a bit more brightness, and the 240Hz OLED in the Zephyrus also covers more of the Adobe RGB color space. So if you are a photographer or a visual artist, you might want to keep an eye on that. Apart from that though, both panels are very well calibrated from the factory, come with additional color presets in their respective software tools, and sport the same response time results and PWM frequency. That said, the G16 gets an anti-reflective coating that does a reasonable job subduing any reflections from the glossy glass panel, while the Razer can be a mirror in certain situations. Alright, keyboards. This will again be quite personal. I like both and it would not be a deciding factor for me, but I think the G16 switches will convince more people. You just get a bit more tactility and travel, while the Blade feels a bit more flat, if that makes sense. The touchpads are also more than good enough for each of our competitors, but I personally prefer the Blade here for its more weighted click. The G16 feels a bit loose, but again, it will hardly be a deal breaker to be honest. So let's talk performance, and I will mostly focus on comparing these two beauties. If you want to get further into it for both or one of them when it comes to power levels and wattages, please check out our individual reviews either here on YouTube or with even more numbers on our website. I will leave all the necessary links in the description below. Kicking things off with the CPUs, you will get the same experience here, with a slight lead for Intel in single-core scenarios and an advantage for AMD in multi-core loads. However, this is hardly something that will make a huge difference in the real world. In our PCMark system performance test, it's pretty much the same story, and the Blade cannot really gain any advantage despite the higher GPU wattage here. Yet. That story changes significantly when looking at our synthetic GPU benchmarks, and the Blade 16 once more shows that there is simply no substitute for more power. It pretty much slaughters the G16 with a very impressive lead across the board. Before we get to our gaming results, I wanted to compare the two 16 inches in some content creator benchmarks, since I think they are well suited for traveling creatives. In Blender, we get the expected lead for the Blade 16, which should hardly be a surprise given the higher power levels and since most of the rendering is done using the 5090s here. Photoshop is a bit more CPU dependent, but seems to favor AMD Silicon here, and Premiere Pro gives us pretty much the same numbers. I also wanted to run the Puget Bench Resolve benchmark, but it can sometimes be a bit finicky and gave me a hard time on the Zephyrus. Nonetheless, I did some editing on both and it was pretty much the same overall timeline experience. Exporting our initial G16 review revealed a pretty massive difference though. The Blade 16 was able to finish the final render with an almost 2-minute lead. But as always with export times, what are 2 minutes if you spend hours putting together your edit, but it's a clear advantage for the Blade nonetheless. Alright, that's work, so how about games? Well, in our 1080p rating, the Zephyrus can offset its lower GPU power levels with a bit more wattage to the Arrow Lake CPU, and therefore it can hold its own against the Blade 16 here. But as soon as we compare direct FPS numbers in modern titles, the numbers are closer to each other in Full HD and lighter titles. However, as soon as your games ask for more pure GPU grunt, the Blade simply demolishes the Zephyrus, and the difference gets even more significant in QHD or even 4K. And we are not just talking about a few FPS here, especially in the higher resolution settings, we are definitely talking about a difference you can feel. I also ran Cyberpunk and Alan Wake 2 in their maximum settings, which also means path tracing and in the native resolution of 2560 by 1600. And well, it's pretty clear that if you want to get the most out of the 5090, the choice between these is pretty easy. And the performance difference scales quite well between native and using DLSS and frame generation. But of course, more wattage usually means more heat and therefore louder fans, right? Well, how about you hear for yourself and let me know in the comments what you think. Who did better here, the Razer Blade 16 or the Zephyrus? I also included the speaker test you have already seen or heard in our G16 review, but yeah, in this case it's not really a competition and it's a clear win for Asus here. BatteryLife is also very much in the G16's pocket. The Blade is also quite solid, but the Zephyrus gets you an additional hour in our simulated Wi-Fi test. So if you work a lot in places without any outlets nearby, the G16 wins in this regard. Alright folks, it's time to wrap it up here. Generally speaking, it should be quite easy to make a decision here, but I can't really bring myself to name the Blade 16 the better laptop. Is it the better performing one? Sure. Is it a bit more sturdy and has a slight edge when it comes to connectivity? Absolutely. And if you want to get the most out of the 5090, it should definitely be your preferred pick. But the G16 also has its perks, and I think it does a little better with everyday notebook stuff, since it offers a slightly better typing experience, much better speakers and longer battery life. But it really feels like a bit of a waste to get this one with a 5090 and not being able to get more out of it. So I would say if you are fine with something like a 5070 Ti or maybe even the 5080, then the G16 will be a much more attractive contender. But if you are the ultimate power user, be it as a creative or a gamer, and want the fastest laptop in the smallest possible form factor, well then the Blade 16 is most likely for you, and it would also be my personal choice between these two for 2025. But please folks, given how subjective and personal this decision is, let me know what you think and why in the comments below. I cannot wait to read what you have to say. That should also be it for today. Thanks a ton for watching. I really hope you like these direct comparisons. And if you did, please leave your like and your sub if you're new around here. My name is Alex, you have been fantastic, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one. Take care.